Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your Audio Amigo, back with another Audio Amigo review for y'all. Tangzu has an interesting relationship with flagship IEMs. By my count, they have the upcoming Wukong, the XuanWu Gate, the Nuja, there was also the Ju Bajie, but the Bajie has now vanished, and what we have here is his shadowy alter ego. This is the Tian Peng, priced at $630 just like Bajie, and like its predecessor, it's packing Tangzu's massive 14mm dynamic driver and a bone conduction piezo tweeter. Unlike the Bajie, however, the Tian Peng trades the magnetostatic driver for an extra pair of balanced armatures, bringing the grand total to 6. With the Wukong around the corner and the XuanWu Gate still on sale, does the Tian Peng do enough to stand out compared to its older sister? Let's find out. My usual disclaimer is going to be a little bit different here. The Tian Peng here was purchased by me from Angel Ears for review, but at a discount. Since the discount has a tangible monetary value and I could turn around and sell this if I wanted, I've gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. In addition, Angel Ears have provided me with a discount code exclusive to anyone who watches this video in case you want to buy the Tian Peng here. I'll have it scrolling across the bottom of the screen. I need to stress, this is not an affiliated coupon. I do not receive any kickback or monetary benefit from the use of this code at all. It's just for you guys from Angel Ears. However, like with the Hi-Fi Go code, Angel Ears is probably using this code to gauge my audience. I will provide you the coupon, as I said, down here. But for now, I just want y'all to know, as usual, that I do all of these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal taste at play. Thank you so much to Angel Ears for the discount for me and for the discount for y'all. And more importantly, thank you to all of you watching for your continued support. One thing that certainly suits the flagship moniker is the unboxing experience here. It's essentially identical to the unboxing experience on the XuanWu Gate here. You get the IEMs, a branded cable, more on that later. You also get Tangzu's excellent but not quite pocketable leather carrying case. You get a full set of Asla's Origin ear tips, and as well as the brand new Tang Sancai Noble tips with the metal there in the nozzles, and a Vortex cable branded cable tie for said cable. The case, while not pocketable, does have a removable insert that will help you keep your IEMs organized. Come on. It does come out, I promise. It's just tougher than it was when I... There we go. So, removable insert helps you organize your IEMs, your cable, and up to 3 sets of ear tips, which I quite like. There's also several dongles that fit quite nicely here. The top has a mesh pocket for fitting some extra things in case you want to put something in there. Even without the insert in place, the whole case is very crush resistant and would do great in luggage or that sort of thing. And yeah, the inside is nice and soft to protect your IEMs from damage. Only real complaint here is the size, but again, this is a travel case, not really a pocketable unit. Overall, I would say 2 sets of premium ear tips, nice cable tie, really nice case. This fits in rather well for the price in terms of accessories. Only real complaint is that there's no sort of nice-to-have items like a shirt clip, a cleaning cloth, a cleaning brush, that sort of thing. But the way everything is packaged, I feel, is an enormous bonus. It's very premium unboxing this thing, and overall, I'll say appropriate for the price. The Tian Peng here was released in collaboration with Vortex Cables, who provided this bespoke cable for the Tian Peng. It looks to me like Vortex took their entry-level $300 Eddy squared cable, added some gold to the cloth weave, and replaced the swappable Con-X 2-pin connectors from Effect Audio with standard Tangzu branded 2-pin connectors. Like the Eddy squared, this is a 2-wire twist that splits into individual wires at the Y-split. We'll go ahead and start with the good. The hardware here is awesome. The 4.4mm connector has nice Tangzu and Vortex cable branding on it. The strain relief is very functional. The Y-split is a really fun triangular shape design that you see on lots of Vortex's cables. And the cool thing is the chin slider here sort of tucks into a little slot, which means that it not only sits flush, but it actually sits recessed into the Y-split, which I really like. The chin slider is nice and functional, and yeah, I just think it works very well here. The ear hooks are very comfortable, and while there isn't any color coding on the hardware, you do get very visible R and L connectors here. Interesting thing here is, again, these connectors are clearly meant for recessed sockets, and if you look at the Tian Peng, the connector socket here looks like it would be recessed, but it isn't. Now, I typically harp on that a bit, but in this case, I don't think it's that bad. This is clearly meant for in case you want to take this cable and use it on another IEM. Perfectly understandable here. Now, whether you would want to use this cable on another IEM is a completely different question. So let's move on to the bad. First of all, it's microphonic. There's no getting around it. This transmits friction and sort of rubbing noise up the cloth braid, and you will hear it in your ears, especially at low volumes. That said, of all of these sort of shoelace cloth type cables, this has been the least microphonic of the bunch, and at louder listening volumes, I didn't find it all that distracting. So well done with that, Vortex. However, none of that really matters because this is one of the least behaved cables I have had to deal with. All I really want out of a cable is for it to not get in the way of my listening experience. And every time I put these in my ears, I would end up twisting the cable some way that it didn't like, and it was just impossible for it to just flow nicely into a position that I wanted to keep it. Even laying it down on the table, it forms these ridiculous loops. There was one time where I had the Y-split looking like this when it was hanging off of out of my ears. It's just very difficult to work with, very tough. I would have to let it dangle down with gravity to make sure it was straight, then route it a certain way to my amplifier or device so that it doesn't bend in on itself. Have a player in your pocket, you better make sure that you pull it out of your pocket the exact same way every single time, otherwise it becomes highly annoying to deal with. You can rotate the connector to try and fix that a little bit, but it's just not something that I want to do with cables. Why should I have to babysit the cable while I'm listening to music? Just let me enjoy my music. Okay, bit of a rant here. If you like cloth cables like this, then you'll probably enjoy this one if you can get it to sort of behave. Me personally, I wish Tangzu had just given us an in-house cable. The one here is quite nice, saved us all the cable collab fee, lowered the price of the entire IEM, and given us a better cable in the process. I'm sorry to Vortex Cables, I'm sure you guys make good things, but this one here just isn't for me. Build quality on the Tian Peng here makes sense, considering it's essentially the brother to the Bajie. You get full resin shells with resin faceplates and resin nozzles that are part of the lower shell here. They feature a little metal mesh filter over the nozzles to protect from debris and moisture, and while there is no ventilation on the inside of these shells, there is a rather large vent here on the side next to the 2-pin connector. That did mean that I didn't have any pressure buildup issues and no driver flex from that enormous DD, which is always good to say. So that massive grill thing here is doing its job. The 2-pin connector, again, is not recessed despite really looking like it should be recessed. But one thing I do like is the shells have these little stereo indication dots on them, so you can easily tell right from left at sort of a glance. There are no other acoustic features to talk about here. They are filled resin shells as opposed to hollow, so they will be a little bit sturdier. But all of these typical resin IEM weaknesses apply here, so cracks in the resin, maybe the top plate coming off, the metal filter here coming off. They're built fairly well. One thing I will say that I'm a bit disappointed here in the build is compared to the XuanWu gate here. This is full metal, very beautifully machined. This did have an issue with the nozzles coming unglued, so maybe this was in response to that, but personally, I would rather have the full metal shells of this guy rather than the full resin of this. But let's go ahead and pull up these specifications for the Tian Peng here. Unlike the Bajie, which was a quad brid, the Tian Peng is a tri-brid, featuring Tangzu's 14.2mm dynamic driver, which uses a silk silicone diaphragm with a sort of spandex surround. In addition, you have 6 balanced armatures in 3 pairs, all of which are unbranded custom units. And finally, we have a single ceramic PZT that Tangzu is billing as a bone conduction unit. Despite the massive driver and the 6 balanced armatures, these are surprisingly easy to power, and I had no issues pushing these with all of my older devices, and the Apple dongle was more than enough to get extremely loud here. These do change sound with higher output impedance sources or impedance adapters, but the change is slight, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend buying a dongle just to run these, as I think that slight change is a positive one, but we'll talk about that in a minute. If you're going to be spending $630 on an IEM, though, you should already have a pretty decent source. In terms of weight, the full resin construction here keeps the shells relatively light, but they are rather huge shells, weighing in at just under 8 grams per side. The cable does add some heft, which is to be expected with a premium cable like this. The nozzles here are a little on the shorter side, and the width at the widest point is right at 6mm. We'll check out comfort a little bit later, but these are just rather large in terms of overall shell size. Overall, the giant DD separates this from other sort of DD plus BA hybrid setups, and we'll have to wait and see what kind of bone conduction effects that PZT has later. But now we have to talk about the cool wall, and this is an area where Tangzu has always done very well. The color scheme they've chosen here on the Tian Peng is pretty awesome in my opinion. Purple and gold is always a solid color combination, and adding the blue in along with the black gives the IEM some sense of depth with the shells here. I think it works really well. I like the gold symbol on them. The mostly matching cable works pretty well to carry the theme through. I do wish the cable had some blue woven in it. If you're going to get Vortex cable to reweave a bunch of cables for you, I think putting some blue in here would have made sense. It would have made it nicer. But you know, that's really a small nitpick to what is otherwise a sub-zero cool IEM. I think Tangzu does a really great job with their faceplates, their IEM designs, and even their box art. And for me at least, this will be Tangzu's second trip to the sub-zero section. Good job. Historically, Tangzu has also done very well with the Council of Ladies, so let's see if the Tian Peng will continue the trend. Are these pretty? Well, we have a 3-2 split verdict, but no votes for not pretty. While this would normally be a good showing, Tangzu does normally do better than this. As far as compliments go, we see the exact same score, which is, again, something you don't see all the time. They must have been pretty strong in their convictions here, but finally, let's go ahead and take a look at their thoughts. One common thread that you'll see here is that the Tian Peng looks better in professional photos than sort of worn in person. When I do these surveys, I send the ladies a publicity photo from the manufacturer's website and a photo of the unit in my wife's ears to help them gauge sort of size and more true-to-life colors. And I think the difference between the photos and real life is what's holding these back versus the rest of the Tangzu lineup. Overall, though, I would say these are pretty positive opinions. Good job, Tangzu. When it comes to comfort, the Tian Peng are, let's say, a mixed bag. The shells here are absolutely enormous. The nozzles feature a very prominent and wide sort of funnel ramp to them, and they're actually quite short. The shells themselves have a semi-custom design with a wing here and a bit of a valley there, a quite large bulge here, hoping to fit in your outer ear pretty well. And honestly, if these very chunky shells don't fit your outer ear, you're going to need longer tips to try and get some sort of a seal. I, with my large ears, didn't have a lot of problems. I was able to wear these for long periods of time with no comfort problems. They were definitely noticeable in my ears, and I did feel them, and I did need to sort of work around a bit to get a good seal. And I will say it's one of the less comfortable IEMs I've worn for sure, but honestly, it was still comfortable for me overall. My wife immediately failed these with a score of bad on the tiny ear test. She was actually able to form a seal here, but it failed almost instantly. It lasted maybe a couple of seconds. These looked hilariously big in her ears, and she would never be able to wear these for any discernible period of time. I'm sure this, part of their shape and size issue is caused by the massive 14mm driver that they're squeezing in here. I do think that a longer nozzle or a maybe slightly less custom shape would maybe have helped, but I'm not an IEM designer, so I don't know. But then again, a longer nozzle would make these stick out of your ears even more, making them look even more ridiculous in ear. So yeah, not the best in terms of comfort. So before we talk about the sound, let's talk about the bone conduction effects on this IEM. As y'all know, I tend to divide these into sort of fun, bassy bone conduction and more subtle, soundstagey bone conduction. Those are the two main types that I've personally experienced. The Tian Peng here falls into the soundstage category. I will also say, however, that personally for me, this has been the least bone conduction-y IEM I have ever experienced. I did do some A/B testing with the other bone conduction IEMs that I currently have, and these were extremely, extremely subtle. I could barely tell what bone conduction was happening here. Less than the Fan 3, less than both of the flip ear siblings, less than the KBO3, KBO2, all those other ones. This is barely there, if anything. What I will say is, if you're interested in getting a bone conduction IEM, I would personally look elsewhere, as I barely felt it here on the Tian Peng, and I typically tend to feel bone conduction effects, at least in other IEMs. Even really subtle things like the Penon Fan 3, I do pick up on. So, looking for bone conduction, maybe not this one. But we'll start the audio evaluation with the area that is this IEM's strongest and somehow also weakest, that being the bass. The 14mm dynamic driver in here is an absolute powerhouse. It packs some serious air-moving power, and the rumble, grunt, and texture that it can provide in the sub-bass is some of the best sub-bass texture that I've heard, and I think it really is something special. Flow Rida's low with T-Pain sounded awesome on these. The low bass drops are wonderfully rendered and are 100% that sort of detached subwoofer sound that I can really get behind. It's just a real shame that the rest of the bass presentation is super uneven. The Teddy Killer's pump, for example, exposes just how much this driver I think is being held back by the tuning. The drops here vary a whole lot more in frequency range. The higher ones reach up into the sort of hundreds of hertz area, and that's where this sort of falls apart for me. The initial hit of some of these drops feels awesome. It's big, it's powerful, you get a big puff of air movement, and then it just is gone. The decay is so fast and thin. It's like the impact is all you get and nothing else. There's no staying power here. It's very paradoxically light in feeling. It feels wonky. It feels a bit unbalanced, at least to my ears. I do hear what is I think a massive cut in the mid bass, and I think that's the cause of some of this unevenness. It's even more exaggerated than some other mid bass cuts that I felt. And honestly, similar tonality with some drums or bass guitar. The big bass drum in Earth, Wind & Fire's Let's Groove. It sounds like it's at the back of the room. It just has less impact or staying power than I was expecting it to have. It was a little bit jarring in the track that's mastered to be really big and thumpy with that drum. When this dynamic driver hits, it hits hard, and it feels incredible. But when it's missing, it feels, like I said, wonky, unpolished, and sort of held back. Based on the Tian Peng, then, it can be the best or the worst part of this set. Which it will be will depend on the track you're listening to, your personal bass preferences. Higher volumes did tend to help, but that's more of a band-aid solution than an actual solution. And the sub-bass can be overwhelming at those higher volumes. So overall, mixed bag in the bass. Mid-range, on the other hand, is very straightforward. Due to that massive mid-bass cut, the mid-range here is extremely clean, super clear, and to my ears, as you might expect, a little bit thin and a little bit lean. The Stone Temple Pilots Plush sounds pretty nice here on the Tian Peng, but I feel like some of the warmth and weight of this very emotional track is sort of missing. The bass and the kick drum are there, but they don't lend the sort of low-end weight that I'm expecting, and while the instrument separation and overall detail is fantastic, the whole track just feels thin and light to me. Female vocals fare much better and are really, really nice on here thanks to that anemic mid-bass and lower mids. Aki, Roboko, and Ayame all sounded fantastic in Suspect. The tonality was great, the vocals were forward without being dominant or overwhelming, and they're all sitting nice in front of the instrumentation without drowning everything out or making it feel lost. Except for some of those bass drops, which are, again, really soft and really quick. So yeah, the mid-range overall is, I think, great, so long as you're okay with the sort of lean, clean, light-feeling lower mids, which I personally don't care too much for. Upper mids and treble, also excellent. The upper mids are emphasized enough that female vocals feel like they have some dimension to them, some good depth, some good airiness, and yet they don't come across shouty, sibilant, or fatiguing. The Supreme's Baby Love, one of my classic sibilance tests, sounded just fine. Even their sharpest sounding S or T sounds didn't make me want to lower the volume, even at more moderate volumes, and the treble, right in line as well. Good airiness, good sparkle, really nice detail, but nothing that makes me want to recoil or reach for the volume knob in a panic. Alan Silvestri's Romancing the Stone has those bells, sandpaper blocks, and the hi-hats in the intro, very, very quiet, and they're very prominent. They continue throughout the song, and I felt like the Tian Peng here rendered them wonderfully. There was no piercing sharpness, no grainy texture that it shouldn't have. It was airy enough for me without being too airy. It was just a very clean, balanced treble presentation. I think the mid-range and the treble here is tuned extremely well. When it comes to technical performance, that enormous dynamic driver does very nicely with low-end details. I was able to get the rumble off the echo of the bass guitar in Steely Dan's Black Cow that I typically expect. This is an extremely capable driver, and even when it's not in its sort of happy place that I was talking about earlier, it can still resolve things quite well, just not as prominently as if the tuning was maybe a little bit warmer. As far as my classic Waltz for Debbie test goes, the Tian Peng did rather well. The glassware notes were all present where I expected them to be. They had, they were all where and when I wanted them to be. I wasn't missing any. What I was missing a bit, however, was the background conversation. It was just a little bit quieter and harder to spot for than I was originally expecting it to be. It was still there, but I had to go looking for it, if that makes any sense. In terms of tribrid technical performance, I don't think this set reaches the level of the Mega5EST or the Variations, but it is better than something like the Punch, which is tuned to be a bit more veiled sounding than this. Overall, while it's decent, I don't find this to be a technical tour de force. The stereo separation on the Tian Peng is quite nice. Blue Oyster Cult's Burnin' For You with the separate instruments in each ear sounds nice and wide. I didn't get the impression that the sound was being crushed or super intimate in the center of the stage. It was nice. In a similar way, the perceived 3D soundstage here is decent. It won't elevate poorly mastered tracks, but it won't crush down well-mastered ones either. The Jackson 5's I Want You Back, I think, conveyed all the positional cues from the recording very cleanly. The imaging was solid. I could point out where the bass, the tambourine, the different vocals and guitars were coming from. It was a very good replay of this track. Overall, I would say it's a good performer, but nothing that blows my socks off, especially at this price point. I would say for a $630 IEM, this is right about average in terms of stereo separation and perceived 3D soundstage. Real quick, let's talk about the use of impedance adapters or higher output impedance sources on the Tian Peng here. If I pull up the graph, you can see that there are a few differences, but in ear, what I most noticed was the boosted bass and the slightly more forward upper mids. It isn't what I would call a big sort of night and day difference, but it also is noticeable. Personally, for me, that big bass boost did help with the sort of wonky mid-bass texture and presentation. It didn't completely fix the problem. It was still there, but it was slightly better. I personally would basically have this living on a 33 ohm impedance adapter. This one's from FiO, or put a impedance cable on it. That way it would just be the standard tuning all the time. But that might not be for you. It does make the bass a bit more overwhelming. So stick with the stock tuning. If you want to try to fix the bass without EQ, maybe stick one of these on there. All right then, the Tian Peng. Tangzu describes it as a more neutral sound signature, at least compared to the Bajie. And to me, it is. It's sort of a leaner, cleaner, more restrained Harman type of signature with that even more pronounced mid-bass tuck and less energetic upper mids and treble. It's not super airy or fatiguing, and I can agree with Tangzu calling it a more neutral IEM. Now, I don't have a ton of IEMs in this price range, but I've gathered what I feel are some alternative options in terms of neutral-ish IEMs, one of which I wasn't able to A-B compare, so we're going to be doing some graph sniffing. But to make up for that, I do have a budget Soundalike for y'all, so without further ado, let's get into it. And we'll start with said budget Soundalike. It's the Aoshida E20, priced at $50 US. Now, these two aren't perfect matches for each other, but they're quite close in terms of what I'll call their sort of general sound profile. In stock form, the Tian Peng hits much harder in the sub bass, but the overall balance of the low end is better for me on the E20. While they both have a similar approach to upper mids and treble, the Tian Peng is more forward, more detailed, and definitely sounds like the more mature tuned set of the two. The E20, however, is much cheaper, and if you like the way I described the sound of the Tian Peng, maybe check it out for a taste of what this could provide. As a bonus, the E20 responds in a pretty bass head way to impedance adapters. Stick one of these on there and you're on your way to sort of bass head heaven. So if you want to try out the Tian Peng and get a taste of a bass headset in a pinch, I think this $50 works pretty well. But we'll go ahead and start with our first comparison, and it's going to be a bit of a graph sniffing session. That set was a loaner. I don't have it with me anymore, so we're going to have to go off my listening notes, my detailed sort of impressions that I write down, as well as the graph. We're going to be speaking, of course, of the Dunu DK3001 BD or BrainDance, priced at $500 US. I have the brand new Dunu Vulcan 2 here on loan, standing in for the BrainDance. The BrainDance and the Tian Peng here have quite a few common tuning points. Both have a prominent tuck in the mid-bass, both have sort of a meta-ish upper mids presentation with good treble extension. The differences lie sort of at the extremes of the frequency range. One of my issues with the BrainDance was that for me, it was a bit lacking in mid-bass and lower mids energy. It meant that it wasn't dynamic or warm or punchy sounding at all, at least in that area of the frequency range. However, based on my notes and by looking at the graph, I'm pretty sure the BrainDance is more engaging in that area than the Tian Peng here. It is, however, lacking the big air-moving punch of this big DD, but I do remember the BrainDance having a more balanced bass profile than at least this. However, one area where I feel that the Tian Peng improves on the BrainDance is the upper treble. I remember calling out the upper treble on the BrainDance as a potential problem spot for people who are sensitive or fatigued in that area, and I'm happy to report that I didn't get any of that sort of slow fatigue that I got on the BrainDance here on the Tian Peng. So if you're okay trading a more subdued technical treble performance for more uneven bass and some extra vocal forwardness, I would go for the Tian Peng here over the BrainDance. If, however, you want that airier sound and a more consistent, controlled, more tonally correct bass, the BrainDance is a good choice, and it is over $100 less. So, Tian Peng is going for a neutral sound signature. It only makes sense to bring in what to my ears is one of the most neutral sounding sets in this price range, the famous Hisenior Mega5EST priced at $550 US. To my ears, the Mega5EST is just, as a whole, a more complete package compared to the Tian Peng here. No, the Mega5EST does not have that deep sub-bass rumble or air-moving power that the Tian Peng and its massive dynamic driver have, but this is still quite rumbly, and more importantly, the mid-bass and lower mids, to my ears, are much more tonally correct. The rest of the sound profile is honestly pretty similar. I did personally find the Mega5EST to be a bit more resolving both in the lower mids and in the upper treble than the Tian Peng. Again, this was more forward with female vocals, it was better with those sort of genres, and it does have the extreme punchiness at the very low end. But with the bass presentation as awkward as it is here, I would personally save the money every time and go for the Mega 5, unless you're planning on EQing this basically permanently. So, y'all know that I like to call the SimGot EW200 Maze the sort of gatekeeper of the $40 range. Well, the legendary Moondrop Variations, priced at $600, is, in my opinion, the gatekeeper of this price range. Now, personally speaking, I'm not the biggest fan of the Variations, and the Tian Peng addresses one of my two main concerns with it, while honestly making the other one a lot worse. We'll start with the good. The Variations to me can be a little shouty at higher volumes and with certain female artists for sure. The Tian Peng fixes that issue. It's, in my opinion, just as vocal forward and just as magic with female vocals as the Variations here, but if you're sensitive to that shouty tonality, this is more restrained while not compromising that vocal energy that we like here. Unfortunately though, my other issue with the Variations is that it was a little bit too lean and thin in the lower mids. And well, the Tian Peng is leaner and thinner. Again, that 14mm driver does some magic at the low end, but the Variation sounds warmer, more energetic, overall more balanced, and just thicker in the mid-bass and lower mids compared to the Tian Peng. If I could only pick one of these two IEMs to have forever, I would choose the Variations every time over the Tian Peng. But what if you want a Tangzu flagship and don't want to spend over $1,000 on the upcoming Wukong? Should you go Tian Peng, or should you grab the XuanWu Gate, still on sale for $20 more at $650 US? While both of these are going for a neutral sound signature, yet again, personally, I prefer the Gate to the Tian Peng. It's just colored enough that it's not straight up neutral. It has a nice satisfying bass boost, it has some extra airiness in the treble to help give it some excitement. The Tian Peng is more forward with female vocals, it's a little bit sparklier with some instruments compared to this. And as you would expect, it has that big rumbly dynamic low end texture. But, you know, the Gate is, I think, just as good through the frequency range. It's more resolving to me, and it's just much more lush, warm, and rich in those lower mids. If you want the sort of cleanest, leanest mids possible, the Tian Peng and its sort of wonky bass presentation is probably for you. But if you want, again, what in my opinion is the more resolving, more neutral, more musical sounding set that's all metal shells and in my opinion just built better with a nicer cable, spend the extra $20 and grab the Gate instead. So, wrapping things up then, Tangzu bills this as a more neutral sound signature, and while I generally agree with them, I think that if what you want is neutral, what's wrong with the Mega5EST or the XuanWu Gate here? I think that they make for much more compelling alternatives if you're willing to spend $20 more or about $100 less. If either of these is too boring for you and you want a more boosted sub bass and a more sparkly treble, then the BrainDance might be for you. Sure, it's a bit on the fatiguing side, but it's great if you can deal with it, and the tonality is amazing, as is the detail retrieval. Same for the Variations, honestly. If you love energetic female vocals and you aren't sensitive to shoutiness, the Variations is the standard for a reason. It is still a magnificent set of IEMs, and it holds up today, even if the lower mids are a little anemic for me personally. Speaking of anemic in the lower mids, Tian Peng, the bass here is just so uneven. It's clear, it's clean, it's so well separated, the resolution is nice, and while it's not as good with female vocals as the Variations, it's still really nice with them. I just think that at this price point, the heat is really on, and I don't know if this is the one I would pick out of this group. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's pull up the Audio Amigo Arbitrary rating scale and see where we can find a place for the Tian Peng here. Packaging, nice and premium. The cable, not really my thing. Accessories, in line with what I would expect at this price point. The tuning is where things get tricky. If we ignore the bass, the Tian Peng is tuned fantastically. It's got clean, present mids, forward but not overwhelming or shouty female vocals, and airy, controlled treble that manages to be sparkly and detailed without sounding fatiguing or sharp. The issue is that bass. In the pursuit of cleanliness, instrument separation, and neutrality, the Tian Peng has one of the most obvious mid-bass tucks that I've ever heard. The result is a bass presentation that is uneven at best and wonky at worst. That enormous dynamic driver provides tons of rumble and sub-bass texture, and when it's in its happy place, it is some of the best bass texture that I have heard. But for most tracks, it just feels like it's being held back, it's being muzzled, it's being constrained so as not to overwhelm the rest of the IEM. If that's the case, why not use a smaller driver and give us smaller shells? If you want to use this driver, let it flex its muscles more, let it be more V-shaped. As I said in the bass segment, this isn't horrible or awful by any means. More volume does help the situation, but when you find a song that straddles both ends of the bass, it's just not a great experience. I do think this sort of tuning will have fans, and if your library isn't full of sort of EDM, hip-hop, or other genres that will really test that mid-bass, I think this whole detached subwoofer thing it's got going on is something that a lot of people have appreciated, myself included, and that's what this set does best. It just seems like it's a lot of money to pay for what is really more of a specialist set. All of that said, with the right songs, this set did put a smile on my face, and isn't that what music is all about? I can't, however, in good conscience, put this any higher than "but I like this" because it is flawed. It is a lot of fun, and you can't really get this dynamic driver sort of feeling anywhere else. It's a huge driver. This is a set that I might try to work some EQ magic on, try and fix it a little bit. If that's something you'd like to see, maybe in a future video, go ahead and let me know. But for now, let's talk about who I would recommend this for. First of all, this is not for you if, like me, you prefer a fuller, richer, weightier, lower mids presentation. This also isn't for you if you want a more neutral or natural sound presentation, because the boomy sub bass here and the very anemic lower mids will definitely not be neutral for you, and it won't be natural sounding either. I also don't think that this is sort of the end-all be-all of technicality or details at $700, as while the detail is overall good, it does lose out to some things priced below it. There are, however, some people that I think will really end up loving this set. First off, people who tried the BrainDance and liked it, but were sort of put off by the upper treble fatigue. This set has a similar mids and treble presentation, but doesn't have that grainy, slow fatiguing treble that the BrainDance had. You can also get even more of a detached subwoofer sound to this than with the BrainDance. I would also recommend this to people who want the absolute cleanest mids possible without having shouty or fatiguing upper mids and treble. I think this is another thing that this set does very, very well. Lastly, if you're already EQing everything and you want a massive dynamic driver to see how much bass texture you can extract out of it without impacting the sort of tonality or sound signature of it, I think this might be a winner for you. And if you are one of those people who's interested in this set, I'm going to have my code scrolling across the bottom here again. It's just an additional discount to save some money. It is active until the end of the month. And remember, this is not an affiliated code. I am getting no monetary kickbacks or any other benefit from this. It's just for y'all from Angel Ears as a thank you. And that's it. The Tian Peng then, an interesting flagship from Tangzu that really I did have some fun listening to in moments. I can't help, however, but wonder, if it had a standard sort of Tangzu cable and was priced, I don't know, $320, $350-ish, would this have done better? Would it have been ranked higher? I can't say. One thing I do wish is that Tangzu and other companies would tone it down with these premium cable collabs. I've tried two of the ones that Tangzu has done, this and the Wozetian Legend, and I really disliked both cables, so I really would just rather have a more standard cable and save the money. But anyway, next time we're going to be taking a look at the Tanzjim Fission. Does it actually make the origin irrelevant? We're going to find out together. But for now, I want to say thank you again to Angel Ears for giving me a discount on this set and for giving y'all a discount on this set. And I want to say thank you to all of you for watching and for all your continued support. I really hope you enjoyed the video. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch y'all next time.